I want to talk about something that everyone loves: greatness. Okay. Greatness is something that people notice quickly, no matter where it's at, no matter where they find it. Okay. They notice it and they tell people about it. People noticed Caitlin Clark when she was at Iowa. Iowa, a school in a place that most people haven't visited, and a school that has zero women's basketball history. Okay, it'd be one thing if she was at UConn and we found her. It'd be another thing if she was at South Carolina and we found her. No, we found her at Iowa. Okay. Then she got to the WNBA and some haters showed up. That's usually another sign that you're great. Haters show up and they tried to say that Angel Reese was better than her and that Caitlin Clark wasn't going to win Rookie of the Year and that she'd struggle and that, all sorts of other nonsense. Also, have you noticed that the people who said all those things, like, you don't hear from them much anymore? I don't know if Elon took away their Twitter abilities or, what happened to them, but I haven't heard from those people in a while. My point is, though, that we notice great quickly. Okay, we notice it very quickly. Like, we notice something that's going to shift a space quickly. For example, when the iPhone showed up, they sold 300,000 of them in the first weekend, which doesn't sound like a lot, but at the time, when the original iPhone came out, it only ran on AT&T's network. But either way, it shook the market. People jumped on that train very quickly, and people noticed it. People notice great things quickly. Okay? It didn't take long for people to notice that Patrick Mahomes was great. Okay, you saw him play that one game as rookie year, and you walked away, you're like, oh, man, this dude's pretty good. This dude's got it. Whatever it is, Patrick Mahomes has it. Okay, it didn't take long to figure that out. It didn't take long for people to notice that LeBron James was great. You saw him play 2 games, and you were like, holy crap, this dude's 18. This dude's going to be awesome for a long time. He's been awesome for longer than I think any of us thought, but it was clear early that he looked very different from the other players in the NBA. Okay, it was the same thing with Michael Jordan. By like game 15, it was like, this dude's already the best player on the Bulls. All right, and that's how it works for all the other great athletes. It doesn't take us long to realize how great these players are. So we notice great quickly. We also notice terrible quickly. Okay? Like, you saw Jamarcus Russell play 2 quarters, and you're like, geez, Raiders spent the number 1 overall pick on this guy. That guy's a bust. Right? It was clearly bad. It didn't take us long to realize how terrible he was. It didn't take long for people to realize that Ryan Leaf was terrible. He was drafted number 2 overall and was out of the league 4 years later. That doesn't happen to number 2 overall picks. Zach Wilson is still hanging on to roster spots. Okay? We notice great quickly. We notice terrible quickly. Sports fans and consumers in general can quickly identify both ends of that spectrum, great and terrible. Okay, we can identify great and we can identify terrible early in the process. That's obviously not how every player is, though, right? Most players wind up somewhere in the middle, okay? Or they become great later. Okay, some players start terrible and then they progress to solid. Some players start off below average and progress to really good. Some players start as really good and then progress to great. Okay, we see it happen all the time. And I say all this just to say that we can't tell on Anthony Richardson, yet it hasn't kept people from leaping to conclusions, which isn't surprising. Okay, people jump to conclusions all the time. Okay, some people, and this is the interesting part, some people labeled him as awesome, like super quickly, and other people have called him a bust, which feels, a bit heavy. Both really do. And a decade ago, I think the mass population would have looked at the 12 quarters that we saw from Anthony Richardson last year and been like, this guy is a bust, and he would have been out of the league quickly. But the NFL and football in general, the way that it's coached and the way that it is taught, has changed drastically over the past 5 years or so. And here is Tom Brady talking about how those changes have impacted the game of football.
There used to be college programs. Now there are college teams. You're no longer learning a program, you're learning a playbook. And the program is ultimately, like at Michigan, for me, that was a pro-style program. 5 years, I got to learn how to drop back pass, to read defenses, to read coverages, to be coached. I had to learn from being 7th quarterback on the depth chart to moving up to 3rd to ultimately being a starter. I had to learn all those things in college. That was development. Then I went to New England, and I was developed by Coach Belichick and the offensive staff there. I didn't start my first year. I think it's just a tragedy that we're forcing these rookies to play early. But the reality is the only reason why they are is because we dumbed the game down, which has allowed them to play. It used to be thought of at a higher level. We used to spend hours and hours in the offseason and training camp trying to be a little bit better than next year. But I think what happens is discourages the coaches from going to deep levels because they realize the players don't have the opportunity to go to a deep level, so they're just going to teach them where they're at.
That was Tom Brady talking about how the NFL has changed over the past couple of years. And look, he's right. The NFL has changed. The way the guys are coached has changed. Okay? Things change, and that's kind of the way that things go. And I think that for the Colts and the development of Anthony Richardson, this is a good thing. We know that Anthony Richardson's physical tools are great. Like I said, we notice great quickly. We notice the arm strength and the speed and the size. You notice that 5 minutes into watching Anthony Richardson throw a football. Okay, it's easy to see. We know he can throw the ball far, and we know he can run fast. Just like Josh Allen when he showed up in Buffalo. Wasn't hard to figure out that, he could throw the ball a mile and he could run fast, right? But he struggled to be accurate. We knew in the first year of Lamar Jackson that he was wildly explosive in the open field, but he struggled to throw the ball from the pocket. And I firmly believe that Anthony Richardson, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson, all three of those guys a decade ago would have been written off incredibly fast. But like Tom Brady said, the game of football has changed. Okay, the way that guys are coached and taught is very different. Coaches are teaching players where they're at now, which gives them chances to not only develop, but to play sooner. And that is why I like the chances of Anthony Richardson developing into a good quarterback and being the franchise guy for the Indianapolis Colts. The NFL is way more patient now with quarterbacks than what they used to be. And it's paying off for some, and it's to the detriment of others. Baltimore was patient with Lamar Jackson, and I would argue that it turned out pretty well. The guy's won 2 MVPs, and he's one of the 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL. The Buffalo Bills, they were patient with Josh Allen, and now he's the 2nd best quarterback in the NFL. And if Patrick Mahomes played in the NFC, or if Patrick Mahomes didn't exist, then maybe the Bills would have a Super Bowl ring by now. Miami, patient with Tua. They had every reason in the world to believe that he was a bust when Brian Flores was the head coach there. But they're like, you know what? We don't think that this is his fault. Let's bring in a young offensive-minded guy, and let's see if Tua can figure it out. And he did, right? And he was 5th in touchdown passes last year, and he was top 5 in completion percentage, and he led the league in passing yards and all that good stuff. Philadelphia was patient with Jalen Hurts, and he got him to a Super Bowl. Shane Steichen was his offensive coordinator, by the way. The Giants, if you want to talk about the bad side of being too patient, they've been too patient with Daniel Jones. They probably should have drafted a quarterback 6th overall this year, but they decided not to do that. That was a mistake. The Jets were too patient with Sam Darnold, right? They learned from their mistake, and they moved off Zach Wilson pretty quickly. Okay, the league has changed. It is less cutthroat than what it used to be. Now, like I said, that is not always the best way forward. You can be patient and still have a guy not develop. But that is where Shane Steichen comes into play and why I loved the hire from Chris Ballard. Offensive-minded coaches seem to be more successful in making young quarterbacks work. That's why the Titans hired an offensive-minded coach. That's why they fired Brett Vrabel, one of the best coaches, one of the best head coaches in the NFL. They fired him to hire an unproven offensive-minded coach because they know that if Will Levis isn't good, it doesn't matter who their head coach is. That's why the Panthers hired another offensive-minded head coach to hopefully develop Bryce Young, because they know that if Bryce Young isn't good, then guess what? Their team isn't going to be very good. Offensive-minded coaches elevate young quarterbacks, and teams are much more patient than what they used to be. Okay, and the Colts are going to continue to be patient with Anthony Richardson, And Shane Steichen is going to continue to be paid not only to win games, but also to make sure that Anthony Richardson isn't a bust. Okay, that's ultimately why I think he was hired. Right, that is the number one job of head coaches now, and there's so much investment in meeting the quarterbacks where they are, like Tom Brady said, that I think that it's led to better overall quarterback play in the NFL. Like, this is the deepest amount of good quarterbacks I think we've had in the history of the NFL. Okay. Now, it's obviously dominated by Patrick Mahomes because he's the best one, but from a depth perspective, this is the deepest the NFL has ever been at quarterback. And Anthony Richardson, I think maybe not this year, but hopefully next year, will add to that depth. And, if you've been keeping up with Colts practice, you're probably like, Jonathan, Anthony Richardson sucks. And you're saying that because 2 days ago, he went to Cincinnati and he had a bad practice. Okay. But if he plays well tonight, then everyone's going to be right back on that Anthony Richardson bandwagon. Okay. I'm just telling you right now, this is the Anthony Richardson experience this year. Bad game, great game, followed by a good game, followed by an average game, followed by a horrendous game. We're going to be up and down on this Anthony Richardson roller coaster all year. I think he's going to be great tonight. That is also my hope. And it's going to perfectly show us what this season is going to be.